I said, they want me to apologize, Reverend. I said, but I can't do that. I don't believe I've done anything wrong. He said, just do something you can live with. And I tried to make that my motto ever since. And I could live with saying, I admit it, I'm not going to apologize, I'm happy I said it, and I'll say it again. Anyway, I found it, they threw me out. They called a new election, and I ran in that election. They threw me out, and I ran in that election, and I ran again.
They threw you out the second time.
They threw me out the second time, and then I ran in the regular election for a 2-year term, and I won that election. I appealed my case to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled 9-0. And you wouldn't get that today, friend. 9-0. That I was right, Jordan was wrong, and I served in the House and the Senate for the next 20 years. And I want to say something real quickly about the snake. I just remembered today, somebody today reminded me that Jimmy Carter once said, if you wanted to scare white Southerners, Martin Luther King wouldn't do it. You just had to say 4 letters, SNCC. President Kennedy said, and you can hear this on the Kennedy tapes, it's during the Birmingham protest in 1963, and something's happened in Birmingham the night before, and somebody says those SNCC people did something, and Kennedy says, SNCC, what's that? They say the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. John Lewis is the head. Lewis, was he up here a while ago? Yes. So they're sons of bitches, aren't they?
John, here is something that brought us all together. John, Julian, and I guess all of us who have become so accustomed to demonstrations that we're sick of them. No one could remember when there had been a mass demonstration in Washington. I've got to ask you about the March on Washington. We were all back there, behind the podium and behind where Abe Lincoln himself sits. John was our representative. Yes, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had a representative to the big 6 civil rights organizations. As such, John too could speak at the March on Washington. John, how did you find out that there were objections to your speech to be given at the March, and how did you handle it?
The night before the March, we all stayed at what is called the Capitol Hilton Hotel. What is that, 16th and K? And Dr. King, I believe, stayed at the Willard Hotel. And late that evening, someone put a piece of paper under my door. I think it came from that person. Said, John, there's a problem with your speech. You need to meet downstairs, and gave the room number and all of that. Apparently, my good friend and brother, Julian Bond, somehow, and Julian might know more about this than I do. Anyway, we had to make advanced copies of our speeches available to each other. We only had a short time. And my speech was very short. It was really short. And we have been working for several staff members, Snake and others have been suggesting what should be in the speech. And one line I remember in the speech, we were reading a copy of the New York Times, and there was a group of black women in Southern Africa carrying signs saying, "One man, one vote." So in my Washington speech I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too, it must be ours." So we didn't have much problem with that. President Kennedy had taken a position that if you had a 6th grade education, you should be considered literate. Snake took a position that age and residence should be the only qualification for being able to register to vote. Then down in the body of the speech, it says something like, "We march today for jobs and freedom, but we don't have anything to be proud of. Well, many of our people cannot be here, for they're receiving starvation wages or no wages at all. They cannot make it to Washington." And went a little more rhetoric and, playing on words and that kind of thing. But at the end of the speech, I took on both political parties, right, Julian? Yeah. So I talked about the Democratic Party, the party of Kennedy, the party of Rockefeller, the party of Jarvis, all of that. And then at the end of the speech, I said something like, if we do not see meaningful progress here today, the day may come when we will not confine our march on Washington, but we may be forced to march to the South the way Sherman did, non-violently. But even before we got there, Eleanor, there was one line in the speech I recall, and I think Bart was being just a little facetious. One line in the speech I said, you tell us to wait. We cannot wait. You tell us to be patient. We cannot be patient. We want our freedom and we want it now. So I think Bart was trying to soften things up. He said, John, you can't say we cannot be patient. So the Catholic Church believed in being patient. And so no one really objected to it. But some people objected to the line where I said something like, the monsters are restless.
Yes.
The black, and we involved in a serious revolution. April Randolph came to my rescue. In his baritone voice, he said, there's nothing wrong with the use of the word monsters, a revolution. I use it myself sometimes. So that was okay, but when we got down to the Sherman issue, Julian, you should take it on.
Well, John is right that all of the speakers at the march were asked to turn in copies of their speech beforehand, and I don't think I gave John's speech to anybody. I passed it out during the march. That was one of the jobs I had at the march, to pass out his speech because I was Snake's communication guy. But however it happened, it got to somebody, and it got to the Kennedy administration. And through the Archbishop, they complained. And the Archbishop threatened not to give the invocation if John didn't change his speech. You should take it from there.
Well, Brother Randolph, he was really a prince of a man. Unbelievable. And sometimes I say about Mr. Randolph that he had been born on another continent, maybe in another country. He would have been prime minister, president, a king, or whatever. He was just a wonderful man, and he held us together. And it was very hard to say no to April Randolph. He would say, John, can we come this far together? Can we stay together? Can we change this? And at one point, Dr. King said, John, this doesn't sound like you. And we got in a real argument. I said, this speech represents the feeling of the people in SNCC, people that we work with. And so we gave in to Mr. Randolph and Dr. King and some others.
In the spirit of unity and nonviolence, and most of the speech remained, but there were changes made in the speech. We didn't want to have a big to-do over our speech. I think that John and Julian and lots of us backstage trying to pull words backstage, which means people were in SNCC too. We're trying to figure what was the right thing to do. I have one more question before I'm going to ask you all to ask yours, because this is something that again brought us all together. I do want to say that because there were so many people here, this is being streamed on Ustream. We have channel 16 in the back, and there was a camera here from all of the stations here, a pool camera from 4, 5, and 9, NBC, Fox, and CBS. So we hope that those who didn't get in will be able to get some sense of what I think has been really quite extraordinary rendition of what in fact happened during those days when segregation was being broken down for the first time. But I'd like to ask you both about the influence of SNCC on politics, about the freedom ballot, the freedom summer in the Mississippi civil rights movement. I was recruited by Bob Moses, legendary leader of SNCC, who went into the Mississippi Delta when I was still in law school. I went in '63 he wanted a prototype of the freedom schools. And I taught people about the Constitution. Some of them were older than me, some of them were children, and little workshops. And the whole point was that they wanted to bring students down in '64 to do these freedom schools, to get people so that they would feel confident enough to go. So it's because if you went in larger numbers, there would be less fear sending people one by one. I arrived in Jackson Medgar Evers had just led one of, indeed, the first sittings in Jackson. Jackson, Mississippi didn't have sittings like they did in the Southeast. That was to really take your life in your hands, even more so. And so here he was, a man who was grown and had children who had led them to beat terribly. He tried to convince me to stay in Jackson. There were very few, I was a law student. There were very few people in the civil rights movement, very few lawyers, very few people with any legal skills. I said, oh no, I told Moses I was coming to Greenwood. Medgar Evers put me on a bus to Greenwood. He then went back to his own home and was shot in the back. That's when Medgar Evers was assassinated. That's how that was my first day in Mississippi. When I arrived in Greenwood, all of the Moses was not there. Bob Moses was in the north raising money. The oldest person there, who was very young, was Lawrence Giott, who now lives here in the District of Columbia. He had gone to Winona, Mississippi to get Miss Hamer and a bunch of other people who had come from Atlanta at a conference out of jail. They then were put in jail. And here I come, and I turned out to be the oldest person there, the newest person there. So I just asked a lot of questions. Somebody's got to go, but how do I go without being the second round to be put in jail? And it's really interesting in talking with these kids, and they were, when I say kids, I mean 16, 17, 13. They said that the police chief was one of them, but he wasn't violent. That they circled the office every night, and he stood there, but he didn't join the circle. So I said, well, I'm going to go see him then. At least take some preventative action. So I went and I told him that I've been told that he tried to do his job here. And I told him that Elmer Catherine Holmes from Washington, D.C. I went to Yale Law School and I called everybody in the North and told them that I was going over to try to get Miss Hamer and the crew from out of jail. And I just asked them to do one thing. Would you go on and tell them I'm coming? All I'm trying to do is to get them out of jail, and I don't want to be put in jail to try and get somebody out of jail. Well, I have never had an experience like that. I was not put in jail. It must have been wrong. But I met Lawrence Giott for the first time, and I met Fannie Lou Hamer for the first time. Before they let me into the jail, Giott had to go and put some clothes on because they had let him out at night to the White Citizens Councils to be beaten. And then they brought him back. And he was sitting there in the heat of a Mississippi jail, and the only way, with all kinds of apparently bruises and cuts. And he got it, and when he got some clothes on, I met Fannie Lou Hamer for the first time. Fannie Lou had been beat terribly by a trustee. This was the terrible part of it. They said to the black man who was in prison, you better beat her or you're going to get beaten. So she was beaten by another black prisoner. I went back, spent part of the summer there, spent part in New York with the March in Washington. Before I got there was something called the Freedom Ballot. You all have to tell me about it. That SNCC had organized in advance of the Freedom Summer and in advance of the organization of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which is critical to opening up not only the Democratic Party but the Republican Party to democratic election of delegates. Saw that by 68, Julian could challenge a delegation. So would you all tell me how SNCC started this notion of the Freedom Ballot?
John has such a wonderful memory. He'll tell the story. I don't remember the dates.